20 to G77. That's the situation right now in Nigeria. President Bola Tinubu just returned from India, where he secured a $14 billion investment pipeline during his presidential roundtable with Indian investors, as well as getting some renewed economic collaboration with countries like the United States, South Korea, and Germany, amongst others. Now, the Vice President Kashim Shettima has left Nigeria for the G77+China Leaders Summit in Havana, Cuba, on behalf of President Tinubu. The summit is scheduled to take place from September 15th to 17th. We understand that the focus of this summit revolves around the theme current development challenges, the role of science, technology, and innovation, and it's being overseen by the Cuban president, who serves as the G77's chairman. Vice President Kashim Shettima is to participate alongside global leaders such as Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, in discussions concerning development issues predominantly affecting countries in the global south. The Vice President will, on the sidelines of this summit, hold bilateral meetings with other world leaders to promote Nigeria's trade and investment relations in line with the economic development diplomacy of President Tinubu's administration. Kashim Shettima is joined on this journey by various officials, including Abubakar Kyari, the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, Uche Nnaji, the Minister of Innovation, Science and Technology, as well as Adamu Lamua, who serves as Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, among quite a number of other government officials. To walk us through what the benefits are for Nigeria and indeed Nigerians, I'm joined by Chief Economist, SPM Professionals Paul Alaje, who joins me live from the United Arab Emirates. Mr. Alaje, thank you for joining us on the program this hour. We're looking at a coalition of over 100 developing countries here, with 80% of the world population, and their aim is to promote their members' collective economic interests and also creating a joint negotiating capacity within the United Nations. Let's begin with how you think this group has achieved its goals in the past 6 decades of its establishment.
Well, thank you so very much for having me. Good evening. Opinion varies across the world, even experts, regarding the activity of G77. As we speak, nearly over 130 countries are members of G77. And like you rightly mentioned, the purpose of this is for economic development of these countries. While some people believe that G77 members have achieved some level of success when it comes to negotiating economic development of their members, many others believe that G77 have done less in terms of the capacity and the population, the numbers. In fact, many believe that their negotiators don't even know what their compromises will be in order to achieve some of their desires.
So let's focus on the sideline events there, particularly the negotiations we expect the Vice President to have with investors and relations in line with the President's economic development diplomacy. We've seen quite a number of that from when the President went to France, and then the latest trip he had to India, where he struck some very juicy deals in the area of investment back at home. What's in this for Nigeria, particularly when you see that we're not talking about the G20 now, we're talking about fellow developing countries of the world?
Well, developing countries have a lot to do in common. When you look at trade among developing countries, it is really very low. Some developing countries have expertise in some areas. Countries such as India, which is now the largest country in the world, is not more China. And if you see technology growth in India is significantly and sporadically growing. What can Nigeria learn from India, for instance? You notice that a lot of things is putting Nigeria and India together. The President, Bola Tinubu, has just left the G20 meeting where some level of negotiation we hear are underway, which of course will lead to the development and economic growth of Nigeria. we have many more countries that are classified as developing countries. Predominantly, these countries are Southern American countries, some parts of Asia, a majority, virtually all the countries within the African continent are all parts. We are talking of nearly or over 80% of the global population, which means we have a sizable market. We have a notable market. The challenge many parts of the world has with G77 is, can we produce ourselves? Can we grow by ourselves? Can we induce decision ourselves? And most importantly, when it comes to security power, which of course separate from economy.
We may have temporarily lost connection with Mr. Alaji, but we'll reconnect with him shortly, particularly as we explore what Nigeria must do differently, having secured some of this deal. We lost you for a minute. You can go ahead, Mr. Alaji. Mr. Alaji, if you are there, I'm interested in knowing what Nigeria should be doing differently with all of these potential investments that we're looking at. In India, for instance, the president talked about a $14 billion investment pipeline he secured at the presidential roundtable with Indian investors.
Well, fantastic thing to consider. There are a lot of countries that are doing a little bit better or relatively better than Nigeria. And when it comes to investment, they have some of their nationals with the capacity to come invest in Nigeria. I think what the Vice President Kashim Shettima should be pushing for is inflow into Nigeria. If you ask, what is the bigger challenge we have today as a country, as an economy? It is FX inflow is responsible for high inflation. And if we borrow in hard currency, it's even going to put us in worse shape. We need to earn FDI, or most importantly, foreign direct investment and hard currency legitimately without necessarily borrowing. That is why perhaps we have seen President Bola Tinubu, taking the lead in canvassing investment in Nigeria and also not exempting the G77 in this case, which the vice president, of course, has taken the lead in this instance to ensure that we have more. For what we know, Nigeria has sizable population, and the population, if you ask me, is youthful in nature. How do we bring in investment into different sectors in Nigeria, especially among developing countries? And can we, as developing countries, start looking at growing together, growing without excluding any of us? And I can tell you, if we patronize ourselves alone, if we do business with ourselves, then we can see some level of development and economic growth among ourselves. I also ask, there are countries that are developing, but have had some solution in terms of power supply is now stable in some country. We have also seen cost of energy. Some countries have been able to bring technology to solve security challenges. Can we learn from one another so that things that are causing economic woes in some countries, other countries such as Nigeria and a few others, can learn from them?
I hear you, Mr. Alaji. You're saying there's a lot to gain from the G77, particularly when you consider that they cover 80% population of the world. And we've also heard government talking about the power of foreign direct investment and the trade relations occasioned by many of the trips we've seen Mr. President take in the past weeks. But are these short or long-term impact on the economy? Because Nigerians are concerned about how soon will we begin to see the impact of this?
Well, I can tell you that the impacts will come in the medium term. Will they come in the short term, talking about 6 months or 2 years? Well, it may not exactly be because of the processes, international laws that may serve as bottlenecks. But in the medium term, if we truly put forward our best negotiator and canvassers for investment in our country, and we have them spread all over the country, even abroad, I sincerely believe that this will ease the current economic pressure, economic quagmire, and at best, save us from going further in economic downturn in the near future. So I am really very hopeful, provided we can use our best among us to push forward and canvass the Nigerian agenda. Everybody wants to manufacture where you have the lowest labor cost. I can tell you today, with the exchange rate, Nigeria is one of the places where you have cheapest or affordable labor cost around the world. Even if minimum wage goes to 100,000, how much is that in dollars? Even if minimum wage is 150, how much is that in dollars? And a global investor will compare what is regular overhead will be labor cost, how much is land in Nigeria, and how much is it here in the UAE, how much is it in America, how much is it in China? Is it relatively cheaper in Nigeria? How do we now, since we know that pricing, it seems to favor us in Nigeria, how do we use all of these advantages we have in pricing? Can we bring skills? Can we also bring in a foreign investor and make entry into Nigeria relatively easy for them and give confidence in terms of even if we are going to do power shedding for some zone where power may be required? Because even in India, there is no 24 hours power supply, but government has made policy to ensure that industrial zone certainly have consistent power supply that is enough to have output for the country. I believe we can repeat the same in Nigeria.
Hearing you talk about how relatively cheap labor is, it perhaps makes sense if organized labor is asking for as much as 200% increase in the minimum wage. But let's talk about the fact that President Tinubu just left the UAE, where you are, and it's not yet clear how soon the deal is struck with the country will materialize, particularly in the lifting of travel ban. But can you confirm that work permits are now being given to Nigerian women there?
Well, just before the arrival of President, the Nigerian community, some of us here, have continued to push because for every 100 Nigeria, there are few heads out there who continue to damage our reputation as a people. So work permits have been issued for Nigerian women, even Nigerians that have their work permit before or they are changing jobs. In some instances, after police checks and all of those things, it is renewed for them. In fact, residency is also renewed for some Nigerians that we have heard and we have spoken with. But what is the challenge now is that the UAE government seems to have classified Nigerian below age 40 as potential risk because of some of the things that we saw on social media. It trended on social media last year. We also have concerns about some trade relations, which we believe that government at high level can handle with them. But I've also seen in the media here in the UAE, where authorities have said they are having conversation with Nigeria authority, and they believe that this collaboration will yield.
You've talked about of Nigerians below 40 in the UAE, but we're counting on the agreement the president reportedly had with the president of the UAE and looking forward to how that will impact on the quality of life of Nigerians living there. Economist, SPM professionals Paul Alaje joined us live from the United Arab Emirates. Good to hear you.
Thank you so very much for having me.